Hey Shabana, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, Amal?
I'm good. So this is Shabana. We met in Aspen, Colorado last summer, and we were talking about girls' education and education in general. And this is to continue that conversation. So Shabana, to just tell us about a bit about yourself. I know that you have a really powerful story, but can you share with us a bit just about one or your most defining experiences in your life?
Great. Amal, it's great to reconnect with you. Um, so my name is Shabana Basij Rasakh. I am the co-founder and president of SOLA, which stands for School of Leadership Afghanistan. And it is Afghanistan's first and only all-girls boarding school. The school is located in Kabul city, and because it is a boarding school, we are really fortunate to have students from across Afghanistan attend our school. We currently have 70 students in our campus in Kabul, and our plan is to expand it to roughly 200 students in the next 5 years, covering grades 6 through 12. And initially, it didn't start as a boarding school for girls. Back in 2008, when I was in my first year of college, towards the end, I co-founded SOLA with a partner who was in Afghanistan at that time, an American actually, as a scholarship program. Mm-hmm. And the idea back then was to help bright, smart Afghans, boys and girls, gain access to quality education in the US. So we would identify these smart kids in Kabul, help prepare them for the opportunity, especially prepare them for academic and social success in the US before they came to the US. And then after getting to know them for a bit, we would then look for opportunities, especially for boarding school opportunities that would match them and their personality, and that they would be a great fit for the community. And we work primarily with boarding schools in the US, because then that gave the student an opportunity to study more than 1 year in a private school setting, because in public schools here in the US, an international student can only spend 1 year. It was a great start. We started very small with 4 students in 2008 in our campus in Kabul. It was really not even a campus; it was an educational center, if you will. Then in 2011, when I graduated college and went back to Afghanistan, in looking at the future long-term impact of our organization, I began to wonder, what is it that we were doing. I also saw a trend in Afghanistan, where a lot of the Afghan students who came to the US for education, whether they came through our program or any other program, they tend to want to stay in the US and not go back to Afghanistan. It is a very personal decision, even though we felt very strongly that students, especially our own students, would want to go back to Afghanistan. But this is not something that you can enforce. So I realized that while on an individual level, we were changing lives dramatically for these students, and by extension for their families, but I was seriously concerned about Afghanistan. Were we as an organization facilitating brain drain? This was a question a challenge that I was really dealing with. And so I decided to propose a change to my co-founder and our board, which initially I was a bit nervous about, but luckily they were very supportive from the very beginning. And it was that instead of sending students for quality education outside of Afghanistan, why not bring quality education to Afghanistan? And that was the idea. And very quickly, given my exposure with boarding schools here and having had the opportunity to speak at so many of them, and having had the opportunity to also tour so many of the boarding schools and take a look at their educational facilities and residential programs that they offered, I was really taken by the model and realized that this was a great model to localize in Afghanistan. The best way that we could bring quality education to Afghanistan, given the challenges in Afghanistan too in education. The model offered us several great opportunities. One was that it allowed us to bring students from different parts of Afghanistan. And this was, for me, then and to this day remains one of the most important aspects of a SOLA experience, in that even though Afghanistan is a very small country, the fact that, for all sorts of reasons, people haven't had the opportunity to interact. So you have a lot of different ethnic groups who could easily live all their lives without interacting with people of other groups. But boarding school completely changes that, especially when we are actively recruiting students from different parts of the country. Another opportunity through this was that the boarding school model allowed us to bring students from different parts of Afghanistan who didn't have access to quality education in their home communities. In most rural communities in Afghanistan, there is a huge shortage of teachers. I mean, generally speaking, there is a huge shortage of teachers in Afghanistan, but most specifically, a huge shortage of female teachers. So what it means is that in many communities across Afghanistan, girls drop out of school after a primary education or middle school education because in some cases there simply isn't a high school available for them to attend, or there are no teachers, and most specifically female teachers in their communities. Statistically speaking,
like the cycle just keeps going. If girls don't educate, then there will be no teacher.
Exactly. And so what happens is then, statistically speaking, around half or more than half of the districts in Afghanistan don't have a single female teacher. So it impacts girls' opportunities dramatically. And in communities where girls haven't been educated, the fact that families would allow their daughters to receive an education is already a radical decision for the family. And then it doesn't help if there aren't female teachers for their daughters to study from. So it often, as you can imagine, helps when the families can turn around to their community and say, well, but my daughter is going to school, but she's being taught by women. So it is a huge problem. And again, the boarding school model really does address this issue, especially, it allows the student to maintain a home base in their rural community, but come to Kabul city to get great education and then go back to their home community. And so these are some of the, exciting opportunities that came with localizing a model like boarding school in Kabul. So we started, like I said, with 4 students in 2008. To date, we have been able to send more than 50 students to the US and 6 other countries for secondary and tertiary education. And we have expanded in Kabul to 70 students this year, with the goal of expanding to roughly 200 students in the next 5 years before we replicate the model around the country and, in other conflict and post-conflict countries around the world. So that's what I do. I know it's not a brief description of what I do, but I currently am the president of the school and split my time between Kabul and the US, but really the rest of the world, to raise awareness about the importance of investment in girls' education, but also to expand the network of supporters for our school.
So, like, not just girls' education, but education in general. It is very unfortunate, but some people still believe that it's not important. So I guess, okay, let's go back to being like specifically for girls, for women, in the Middle East and Afghanistan and all these places. How do you convince people that education for girls is important and education in general is important?
Uh,
How,
it's a great question. Well, things have changed quite a bit in the even if you look in the most recent 10 to 20 years in terms of convincing people about the importance of girls' education or investment in girls' education. A few years ago, we had a huge campaign called the Girl Rising. It's a movement, and this initially it's a Girl Rising started as it's a documentary about the lives of 9 girls around the world. But initially, it started as a research to address poverty around the world. And so, as a group of journalists were out there looking for answers and how to eradicate poverty, how to address this global concern, um, no matter who they spoke with around the world, they kept coming back to education, but most specifically girls' education. And then it turned into a documentary telling the stories of just a handful of girls whose lives, whose journeys are basically a proof that investment in girls' education has the highest return rate. So luckily, we're living in a really exciting time. And what I mean by that is that we now have years and years of research and study that proves that investment in girls' education is not just a morally responsible thing or the morally right thing to do, but that it's an economically smart thing to do. That if we want to eradicate poverty, if we want to address global health crises, if we want to address terrorism, we need to send girls to schools. To give you an example, if India were to send 1% more of their girls to school, the country India, their GDP will rise by $5.5 billion. So there you see the economic benefits already. As we speak, there are 130 million girls around the world who are not in school today. So it is a problem. We haven't yet fully addressed the problem. Not all of these girls are out of school because of traditional beliefs. That's the misconception about this issue. That all of these girls are not in school because families, especially in countries like Middle East, Afghanistan, and elsewhere, don't value girls' education or don't believe in girls' education. But that's not entirely true. There is an element of truth to that. There are people around the world in countries like Afghanistan, in countries and throughout the Middle East that don't value girls' education, but that's not the complete picture. I can tell you about Afghanistan. That's not the number one reason why girls are not in school today. The number one reason why girls in Afghanistan are not in school is lack of teachers. And like you mentioned, right? If you don't have teachers, you don't have female teachers, how do you get students in a class? How do you educate the next generation of educators? So it is a much more complicated problem that needs to be addressed. But what is most hopeful is that people have started to realize that girls' education or investment in girls' education has benefits that extend beyond helping that one girl or her family, that it improves the quality of life for everyone in communities, but also in our world. So I feel like we need to follow this path and talk about the benefits of it and really put this into action in communities where it's needed the most.
Yeah. But just to clarify though, Shabana, you said, like, I understand why in Afghanistan, they would say they would want women
Mm-hmm.
teachers, but can you clarify to to everyone, like what's the significance about women versus men teachers teaching girls?
Correct.
Mm.
There is in Afghanistan, there is no law that indicates that men are only allowed to teach boys or women are only allowed to teach women. But culturally, it helps families especially who are on the fence, to send their daughters to school. We have a lot of communities where, well, throughout Afghanistan, for most of a child's education, they are in segregated schools by sex. There are all boys schools and all girls schools, and you really this wasn't the case before the civil war. 30 years ago in Afghanistan, boys and girls were able to study in the same classrooms, but this became a more socially acceptable form of education for boys and girls after the Civil War, and especially after the Taliban regime. So for that period of 1996 to 2001, when girls' education was prohibited, we only had boys attending schools and universities. And right after that period, it had its impact on the mindset of people, especially a couple of generation of people. So as a result, we have all girls schools and all girls or all boys schools. But university level, they still go back to the same place. I mean, part of it is because we have so few universities, public universities in Afghanistan, and it has been more acceptable at that rate. But the issue when I talk about the significance of female teachers in provinces is precisely what I said. You have families who for generations have had no woman receive an education. And when there's that one brave family member, mostly men, decide that that's going to change for the young generation of women in their family, it makes it easier for them to maintain a respectable image in their community, to be safe in their community, if they can turn around to their community and say, well, my daughter is being taught by a woman, so back off. But when they don't have that, their challenge is even more difficult, and not to say this is one perspective, but even for a young girl, when she finds herself, or a group of girls find themselves in a predominantly boys school, they may not feel as supported. It must be very difficult for them. If you look at it from the perspective of role modeling, when you have successful women as teachers, then it gives girls that extra opportunity to imagine themselves in that career or beyond, to imagine themselves as working women. That's obviously, that impacts their thinking, their motivation to study beyond elementary school or middle school or high school. So there are so many benefits in places like Afghanistan to having female teachers. Fortunately, there are efforts by both the Afghan government and civil society in Afghanistan to increase the number of female teachers. And there are milestones that the Ministry of Education in Afghanistan is trying to achieve in terms of increasing the number of teachers, but particularly female teachers throughout Afghanistan.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you if that's one of your goals, if that's one of SOLA's goals.
It is in the long run. At the moment, we are focused on expanding the number of our students. We're very lucky and fortunate in that we're in Kabul city, where we have access to really qualified teachers. But we're taking it a step further in that we don't want to completely rely on traditional methods of teaching. So the teachers that we hire to work with our students go through ongoing professional development, where they learn, in a very hands-on approach, how to develop lesson plans that will make their classroom experience more student-centric, how to be creative, how to allow and foster critical thinking in a classroom. And these are all the methods that are new to Afghan teachers, especially because they haven't been educated in such a system. So we have this ongoing training for our teachers, and they are trained by trainers who are based in the US, and all of this happens virtually. For our teachers, it works out really beautifully because at the end, our school in Kabul is run by a group of women in their 20s and 30s. And that, like I talked about role modeling, they become such wonderful and strong role models for our students who hail from all over Afghanistan, to have, driven, enthusiastic teachers who teach them.
How do they speak English? Like, how do
And
they
not
communicate?
necessarily. I mean, it's ideal for us to hire teachers who speak English, but that already limits our pool of candidates. So we really look at, when we hire teachers for SOLA, we look at exceptional talents and young people who are motivated, who actually see teaching as their calling, and they don't see it as a way to get into the job market. And then we work with them. So when we do this professional development training for them, it happens 5 times a week. 3 times a week is English lessons, and the other two times or twice a week is actual instruction on pedagogy and lesson planning and such.
So, just to introduce myself, I forgot to
Yeah,
do that at the beginning. So my
course.
name is Amal, and I was born in the United States, but I lived in Yemen, and then now I'm here back in the United States. And so in Yemen, like, some of the challenges with girls' education is just that idea that women, the role of women is to be mothers. Mm-hmm. So what you need is the primary basic education for how to read and write Arabic, so that you can read the Quran, and you'll be set. You'll be a good mother, a good Muslim, and that's it. So this is like one challenge. How can we obviously there's a lot of challenges: poverty, no schools, especially in more rural areas. Students have to travel literally 2 hours by foot, or donkeys, or anything to get to the school. So, but I think the more complicated challenge is this mental and cultural idea that woman's role is to be in the kitchen, is to be a mother. So this is like one challenge that when I think about women education, this is kind of the biggest challenge in Yemen. What's some challenge? What are some challenges in Afghanistan, and how? I think you already talked about that a little bit, but how do you face them? How do you overcome them?
Mm-hmm. Look, Amal, what you're talking about is a challenge that women face in most societies, not just in Yemeni society. This is a kind of challenge that women have faced in the United States, and to some extent they continue to face. If you just look at the women's movement here in the U.S., this was a huge expectation of women in the 20s, 30s, but the key was getting women educated. You needed to create a critical mass of educated women who would then take on such challenges, the perception of women, and then really starting to challenge people's perception of women, right? Of women as mothers, and women as in careers, and women as professionals. It's not to say that being a mother is a bad role for a woman to have. A lot of women by choice have that and really, really enjoy it. And that's perfectly fine. But it is obviously problematic when societies give that as the only choice for women, right? And you see this as a concern in Yemen, it's a concern in Afghanistan, and in a lot of the countries. The good news is that education is incredibly powerful. Once women are educated, then they continuously take on more challenges, right? Then there's that expectation that they want to work. When they become working mothers, then they make it easier for the younger generation of women. They make it, that woman, that working mother, makes it easier for her daughter. It's not to say that she constantly doesn't get the kind of feedback from around that, she probably is not a good mother because she devotes her time to herself and her career, and she will probably constantly really suffer from that kind of comment and feedback. But over time that changes, so in addressing, what I'm trying to say is that in addressing these kinds of challenges in our communities, we have to have a generational perspective. If you look at a place like Afghanistan, where illiteracy rate among women is so high, the first step is to convince people in the society to allow girls to receive an education. And you can never convince those people to allow girls to receive an education if you say you need to let these girls get an education so that they can become working women. No. Because it's already seen as a threat because it's unfamiliar. They haven't seen it. They also haven't seen women in those roles. So even though it may sound shocking, but in places like Afghanistan, we need to convince people about the benefit of girls' education in the context of educated mothers.
Right.
Because that's what's familiar. That's what is the better thing. And when that happens, you are already allowing those women to be able to be equipped. And I don't want to use the word empower because I think that's a little tricky. To be equipped to be themselves, and they can then decide their priorities, whether their priorities to be educated mothers or educated working mothers or educated women, not mothers. Those are the things that then women decide, but the key is to get them to that place. So these are challenges, but even in societies like Afghanistan, like Yemen, then you have those really strong women who have managed to break through a lot of these barriers and then become those role models, right? That a lot of women can refer to and see, look, if I can be like her, my daughter can be like her, my sister can be like her. And that's where you have the power of role modeling. You've had that happen in this country, in the US. You have it happening around the world. But the bottom line is that for these kinds of challenges to be addressed, we need to have a generational perspective.
Well, you are my role model.
Thank you.
No, I hope that I'll be like you and I'll be a role model to other girls too.
I think you're not only like me, you're more than me. I've had the absolute honor and pleasure of reading your application when you applied for the Bezos Scholars Program. And I was really blown away by what you have already achieved. And to think what you've been able to do in your short years, it's really exciting, it's inspiring, and I'm just so excited to see where you're headed, really. So I think you have some amazing years ahead of you, and I'm so excited to watch you develop into a wonderful role model.
Maybe one day we'll work together, make this
It
organization.
will be really exciting. Yep. Absolutely.
So just one last question. I always think of the other side, and I know we haven't done anything for girls, especially we haven't done much for girls. But what about the boys? Because I feel like the boys too are, I don't know the statistics, but I'm pretty sure that they too are suffering. Yeah. So what,
and it's a very important question, Amal. If you think about, even just in, I keep coming back to Afghanistan because I wanna show that, I am incredibly aware of this issue. It is heartbreaking to see boys ages anywhere from 7 to 12, 13, 14 in the streets of Kabul doing, day jobs, wanting to be hired by hour, by minutes to be able to make money. And oftentimes they beg to wash cars or clean the windshields of taxis in return for very, very little money. And that money is to then support their family, to feed their family. And so when you see that happening in Kabul all the time, it is incredibly heartbreaking. Those boys, if you take a little time off your busy life and speak with them, their biggest wish is to be in school. They wish that their father was alive, or that their mother was educated or could work, so that they didn't have to be responsible at this really young age to support their families. And all of that is very heartbreaking. If you also look at the issues, such as insurgency and young boys being recruited into Taliban or ISIS, everyone can very quickly piece this together, that if we had great facilities, if we had great educational opportunities and employment opportunities for people, that the boys will either end up in school, remain in school and continue with their education, or if they couldn't continue with their higher education, that they would have other means to support their families. So it is very critical for safety reasons too, for safety and security of people, to have boys receive an education. It's very, very important. But also, my biggest wish as an educator is that every child, whether it's boy or girl, has access to quality education, one that allows them to reach their full potential. Having said this, the reason I'm focused very, very passionately about girls' education is precisely what I mentioned earlier. Despite the inequalities in access to education for millions of children around the world, girls remain the most disadvantaged group in accessing education. It's evident in Afghanistan and throughout the world. We talk about 130 million girls who are not in school today. And a lot of it comes back to cultural beliefs, not all, but some of it, right? That keeps them out of school. In some cases, their labor is more valued than their education. So they are either working in the fields, or they are the ones who fetch water to help their mothers to do their laundry or wash dishes. They're seen as babysitters because their mothers are, again, busy with other children or with housework. And so there are so many of these reasons that, or in some places, you have lack of female teachers, or lack of teachers, or lack of facilities for girls. And especially in a lot of these places, one of the main reasons why girls drop out of school in that middle school age is because once they reach puberty, they don't have access to proper health and sanitation in school. So initially it's a lot of missing school days, but then reaching to a point where they drop out because they're seen as women and therefore they should not be in public. So because of all these many, many challenges that girls face in accessing education, I very, very passionately advocate for girls' education. And on top of it, years of studies show that investment in girls' education has the highest return rate. If you educate a man, you educate an individual, which is great and important. But you educate a woman, you educate her family, her community, our society, and the world at large. An educated woman will have fewer and healthier children. An educated woman, especially in developing countries, tend to spend more than 90% of their income back into the family. And so there are, if you even think about it from the perspective of an investor, you invest your time and resources and skill sets and energy, this is the highest return you can get for all of that. And I do want to get the highest return for my efforts and my work and my hard work. The risk I take on behalf of my family, on behalf of myself, I put my life at risk, and I want to make sure that I do get the highest return possible. And my hope is that those girls will then end up becoming the kind of woman who create opportunities, not just for other girls and women, but for everyone, including boys and men.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you. I'm a big champion of women's education, but the reason I asked that is here, like in the United States, in my classes, in all of my IP classes, and really just I don't see boys anymore. I see one or two boys in the class, and and I know that will take decades for other countries, other developing countries, to reach to that point. But what my concern is that we will focus so much on the girls, then we'll have a generation of very educated girls and a generation of boys who are not educated, who go and join ISIS or Taliban or the Houthi in Yemen. It's like it's the same problems everywhere. Like everything that you said, in Afghanistan, I can like definitely relate it to Yemen. Every like things that I saw. So that's really a big concern. But
yeah, I'm sorry. Earlier you were saying that where I don't see boys in class. Which kind of classes were you talking about?
Like really like AP classes.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, just that idea of boys are less likely to do well in class, or less likely to do their homework, and more likely to be in sports, and that could be another conversation for another day. But
Yeah, it is, and look, you are, like I said earlier, you are 100% right to be concerned about what happens to boys and making sure that they're not left behind, and then even for the girls' sake, that they end up as a generation of educated women in places like Afghanistan, Yemen, and elsewhere, that they end up with life partners, but also thought partners and professional partners who are of equal mental capacity and intellectual capacity. Otherwise, it will be incredibly tough for these women, right? But the issue is that it's already not balanced. It's going to take us a lot of time to be able to get to a place where lack of access for boys and girls is an equal issue. It's not. We're not even there yet, and I really hope that we get to a place where we can address these simultaneously, and we should. The reality is that all children deserve to be in school, right? Whether they're boys or girls. That shouldn't determine the problem. The problem is that in some places there is girls especially face more discrimination than boys, and in some cases it's far more easier for boys to access opportunities if their families want them to access opportunity compared to girls. For instance, in Afghanistan, if a boy from a rural part of Afghanistan wanted to access better education, have access to quality education, he or his family could potentially send him to Kabul on his own, so that he could, get to that next level. But if a girl wanted to do this, it's virtually, it's impossible unless her entire family decides to move from that rural part of the country to a city like Kabul in order for that girl to receive
I'm actually
education.
I'm facing that problem here. If I decide to move to Connecticut to attend DL, then like my parents and my family trust me to be there alone. But it's about what are people gonna say? Like it has never happened. In the place where I come from. Like not necessarily in Yemen, but based in my village, in the area surrounding it. So my dad would probably have to move with me, or like one of my uncles, or so. No, it's real. Those problems are.
They're real, and more power to you and your family, because I know this is not an easy decision. I know that there are so many fathers of my students who have decided to take that risk, right? Risk for in terms of risking their reputation with their community, but trusting their daughters. And in most cases, yes, it has been very difficult. It has been incredibly challenging, and at times it has been a risk to their lives and their safety. But if this is of any help to you and your father, but at the end of the day, from my experience, all of those fathers have not regretted their decision. in taking that risk, because what they have seen is a powerful, educated, confident daughter of theirs, who lives beyond and above the expectation of anyone in their family and their community.
Well,
so good luck to you.
thank you so much, Shabana, for all of this.
Yes.
I'm really inspired now to, like, even here in my, Yemeni American community, I literally, go around my friends and their parents and say education, is important. And like, I try to my best to help any of my friends to get a ride to school and any of that, because they truly believe that education, is not important. And it's just, it's,
Yeah.
it's really frustrating, and it's, you need all that patience and that courage to keep going. And I just thank you so much, Shabana, for this
Of course.
call.
And if there's one thing I want to remind you, not that you don't have it, grit and perseverance.
Mm.
I think, when people ask me, how have you been able to do this? Afghanistan, who, in their right mind would think of starting a boarding school for girls in a war zone? These are the questions I get all the time. And yes, it has been incredibly challenging. But honestly, if there is one thing that has allowed me to do the work, but also has enabled the organization, our school, is that I have not given up. There are multiple times where if I had taken a back seat and I said, okay, this is not possible, it's impossible, I gotta stop, SOLA wouldn't have been around today. But you cannot give up. We cannot give up. These are the most difficult, the most challenging times, are the most defining times in our fight for education. So I wish you all the best luck, and in your fight for giving other girls the opportunity and convincing your community that girls' education is important. And believe me, these are difficult years, but you will be able to show them, just by mere fact of who you are, that investment in girls' education, that girls' education also matter and is important. It's just a matter of time. So keep it up. And if there's anything I can do, I hope you know that I'm only an email or a phone call away.
Well, I wish you all the best to Shabana. I hope that, your dream of getting to 100 students and even more will come true. And,
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You're amazing, Amal.
that was
you.
amazing, Shabana. Well, thank you, and assalamu alaikum. I'll see you.
Wa alaikum salam. Take care. Good luck. Bye.